Olivia loved working with archives. Ancient documents, yellowed pages, the smell of time, all this attracted her like a magnet. After university, she was offered a job at the repository of the local historical society. The building was old, with a high ceiling, wooden beams, and narrow windows that barely let in light. It seemed to Olivia that it was whispering its secrets to her as she walked past the shelves filled with folders and drawers. The work was monotonous. Systematize records, restore damaged documents, and translate old manuscripts into digital format. One rainy day, she was assigned to disassemble boxes of materials found in a recently closed house. The house belonged to a famous architect who mysteriously disappeared 40 years ago. No one ever found out what happened to him. The finds in the boxes were not particularly valuable. Drawings of buildings, work notes, a couple of old photographs, and a diary. But there was one strange object, a thick, worn folder covered with dark spots. There was a piece of paper pasted on the cover with the inscription, "Beyond the last step." Olivia decided to leave this folder for last, although the very sight of it made her uncomfortable. Late in the evening, when the rain increased and the whole building seemed to shake because of the thunder, she finally opened it. Inside were scattered notes, plans of some tunnels, and hand-drawn drawings. They didn't look like architectural drawings, more like a map leading down somewhere. Some of the pages contained strange notes. If you're standing on the edge, it's not the end. There's a decision behind the last door, but you won't survive it. Olivia couldn't figure out if this was some kind of experiment by the architect or his personal reflections. The pages were full of confusion. In one place he wrote about the search for light, in another about the inevitable darkness that awaits everyone who takes the last step. The following week, Olivia told her colleague Nate about the strange folder. He was her only friend at work, a cheerful guy who loved to solve complex puzzles. "Let's check where these maps lead," he suggested with burning eyes. Nate knew the architect's old manor. This place had long been overgrown with rumors, and many claimed to have seen a flashing light there at night. Olivia didn't believe in mysticism, but she agreed. 2 days later they went there. They chose the evening for the visit to avoid prying eyes. The estate was surrounded by overgrown bushes, in the shadow of which the paths were hidden, and a dilapidated fence, almost fused with nature. Nate was holding a lantern, and Olivia was carrying a folder with the architect's notes. There was an oppressive silence inside the house. The floors creaked underfoot, and every sound echoed off the scuffed walls. Nate joked that the manor could have been an ideal location for filming a horror movie, but Olivia was too focused on the map. "Let's start with the main hall," she whispered, although no one could hear them. The room was empty, except for a massive wooden cabinet. Someone had scratched the number 7 on its door. Olivia opened the folder and flipped through the pages. On one of the sheets there was a drawing of the same cabinet, but next to it was signed the phrase, "Not what's outside, but what's inside." "Is this a mystery?" Nate chuckled, reaching for the closet. Inside was a small lever hidden behind the back panel. When Nate pulled it, a part of the planks in the floor of the hall clanged, revealing a staircase down. "Are you sure we should go down there?" Nate asked with a hint of doubt. Olivia looked at the map. The stairs were the first point of the route. The rest was like a maze. "It's just an old basement," she tried to convince herself and Nate. They began to descend. The stairs creaked. The air became heavier. The walls of the basement were roughly hewn, and after a few meters they turned into brick. It was dark all around, except for the dim light of the lantern. "It seems like no one's been here for decades," Nate muttered as they reached a wide hallway. There were pieces of wood and debris on the floor. While Olivia was checking the map, Nate noticed something on the wall. Faded footprints, like handprints, stretching towards the far door. He didn't say anything to Olivia so as not to scare her. The first door was massive, with metal hinges. Someone had carved a symbol on it that looked like a circle with a line in the middle. On the map next to the door was written, "Get over the fear, but be ready to come back." What does that even mean? Nate grinned nervously, but pushed the door open. A strange tunnel system began behind the door. They were narrow, with low ceilings and the absence of any signs or signs. Olivia checked the map at every step, but the further they went, the more confusing the terrain became. And then they came across the first room. It was small, but neat. Inside there was a table with folded sheets of paper on it. Someone had written words on the wall in red paint. "You're looking for the end, but are you ready to find out what's behind it?" "Something's not right here," Olivia said softly, unfolding one of the sheets. It was a note. The handwriting clearly belonged to the architect. "If you found this place, then you've decided to make a move too. There are no easy answers here, only consequences. Follow me if you have the courage." Nate began to lose his patience. "We're playing some kind of sick game. Let's go back." But Olivia was obsessed with finding out what the architect was trying to hide. She persuaded him to move on. As they went deeper into the tunnels, the air seemed to become denser, and the sounds of their footsteps echoed too loudly. "This place is too big," Nate muttered. "How could it possibly fit under the house?" Olivia found another note. This time, the handwriting was blurry, as if the author had written it in a hurry. "Can you hear them already? You have to be faster. The door at the end is your only way out." "Who's them?" Nate asked, but there was no answer. Suddenly, there was a sound behind them, as if something had fallen. They turned around, but the hallway was empty. "We're not alone here," Olivia muttered, clutching the map. Nate gripped the lantern tighter, his face paled. Olivia felt her stomach tighten, but the fear turned into an insistent desire to move forward. "Maybe it's just the plaster crumbling," she suggested weakly, but even her voice sounded uncertain. The corridor began to turn to the right, then sharply down. The floor became slippery, the walls narrowed. On the map, this place was called the border, but there was no additional explanation. "Stop," Nate suddenly said, stopping Olivia. He pointed to a dark cavity in the wall, a niche in which stood a broken wooden bench. Above it, someone had scrawled the phrase, "Stop. You don't need to know any more." "It seems like someone didn't want us to go any further." Nate licked his dry lips. "But we're almost there," Olivia countered, pointing at the map. They walked on, but each step was harder and harder. It seemed that the tunnels were not just narrow, but pressing down on them, as if trying to push them back out. Nate's flashlight began to blink, the draining battery adding voltage. "If he goes down, we're finished," Nate muttered. Soon they came across a second door. This one was wider, made of metal. The handle looked worn, as if it had been touched hundreds of times. There was another symbol on the door. Now it's a triangle with a circle inside. "What are these strange signs?" Olivia asked, but got no answer. There was a sign on the wall next to it, hammered into a brick. It read, "If you open this door, there will be no turning back." "I already regret that we came here," Nate sighed, but Olivia, as if she hadn't heard him, pushed open the door. Behind her, a large room opened up, looking like an abandoned warehouse. The ceiling was high, and rusty chains hung from it. There were boxes on the floor, but they were empty. There was a table in the center of the room, and on it was something covered with a cloth. "What's in there?" Nate took a step back, as if sensing that approaching the table was a bad idea. Olivia slowly lifted the cloth. Underneath it was a folder exactly like the one she found in the archive. "It's impossible," she gasped. The folder was covered in dust, but inside were the same maps and notes. There was a fresh inscription in the corner of the first page. "You've gone too far." Nate noticed another door at the end of the room. It was locked, but it looked relatively new. There were no symbols or signs on it. "What now?" he asked. Olivia checked the map. This door was the last point of the route. Everything that happened next was missing. The architect did not leave any notes about what is behind it. "We have to open it," she said. Nate shook his head. Can't you see that this is a trap? Someone deliberately lured us here. But who? There's no one here. Their argument was interrupted by a strange hum that came from outside the door. It was a low, vibrating sound that made my heart skip a beat. We're leaving, Nate said firmly, grabbing Olivia's hand. But the door they had entered through slammed shut behind them. No, no, no. Nate rushed to her, trying to open it, but without success. The hum grew louder. It seemed that the walls began to vibrate, and the air was filled with a strange pressure. The only way out is up ahead, Olivia whispered, looking at the last door. She came closer and took hold of the handle. There were strange grooves on its cold surface, as if left by nails. Nate was yelling at her to stop, but she wasn't listening. With the turn of the knob, the hum instantly stopped, and absolute silence ensued. What's next? Nate whispered. We'll find out, Olivia replied, and pulled the door open. Olivia slowly opened the door. It creaked, breaking the dead silence around. Beyond it was a long rectangular corridor lit by rusty lamps that barely flickered. The corridor was too clean compared to the rest of the tunnels, which looked strange. It looks different, Nate muttered, scanning the space carefully. The floor was lined with concrete slabs. The walls were covered with a smooth gray coating that had no cracks or traces of time. The air here was heavy, with a faint smell of chemicals. Someone was here recently, Nate said, noticing the muddy footprints on the floor. Olivia looked at the map. This area was empty. No notes, no pointers, just a void. They walked a few meters until they came across the first branch. It was a small room with no door, only an arched passage. Inside there were several metal cabinets and a table littered with papers. Someone used this place as a base, Nate whispered as he walked inside. They began to inspect the contents of the table. These were old reports, maps, and photographs. Some of them depicted people in work clothes standing against the background of the same tunnels. There was a caption on the back of one of the photos, "The last stage of construction. Do not mention this object in the reports." They were hiding something, Olivia said, sorting through the papers. Nate found the magazine. It had a list of names marked with different colors. Some names were crossed out, while others were marked with strange markings. Moved, approved, unavailable. What does that even mean? Nate showed Olivia the magazine. It looks like keeping track of people, she replied, thoughtfully flipping through the pages. There was another closet in the far corner of the room, the doors of which were locked. Nate tried to open it, but the lock was too strong. There may be something important here, he said. Let's move on, Olivia suggested. They returned to the hallway and continued walking. The walls began to change. Metal panels with inscriptions and signs appeared. The inscriptions were technical. For example, Fire Safety, Module 3, Atmosphere Control Room. These are not just tunnels. There was some kind of complex system here, Olivia concluded. A few minutes later, the corridor led them to a massive door with a sign, "Checkpoint. Only for authorized persons." There was a remote control with a keyboard on the door, but the system looked ancient, as if it hadn't been used for decades. "And now what?" Nate asked, examining the mechanism. Olivia found a small drawer next to it, which contained old papers. Among them was a sheet with instructions and a code, 5174. She entered it. The lock clicked and the door opened. Behind it was a huge room lit by dozens of lamps. In the center of the room was a large table surrounded by monitors and equipment. But the monitors were smashed and the equipment was covered in dust. There were maps on the walls that marked the tunnels and lists with some codes. Olivia came closer and noticed that some of the markings on the map matched the places they had already visited. "These tunnels are connected to some kind of project," she said. There was another note on one of the tables. "If you're reading this, then you've already gone too far. There is no way out here but to find out the truth. But you have to be ready to take the consequences." What the hell? Nate started to panic. It's just a warning, Olivia said, though her voice was shaking. There was another door on the opposite side of the room. It was ajar, and there was a faint light behind it. We have to check, Olivia said softly, heading there. We don't have to do anything. We need to leave. Nate grabbed her arm. You said yourself that you wanted to solve this mystery, she reminded him. They entered the next room, which turned out to be a laboratory. The shelves were littered with test tubes, containers, and tools covered in dust. On one of the tables was a folder with the inscription, "The END Project. Confidential." Olivia opened it and began to read. Inside were descriptions of experiments related to tunnels. It was a secret project, the purpose of which was to build an autonomous underground facility. But something went wrong. Testing has shown that the object is unstable. The disappearance of 2 workers and strange acoustic phenomena were recorded. We decided to stop the construction and isolate the place. It's just an underground facility. Nothing mystical, just a failed project, Olivia said, trying to calm herself. But at the bottom of the report was handwritten. No one should go down the last door. We have to leave, Nate repeated, but Olivia wasn't listening to him again. She went to another door at the end of the room. It was massive, sheathed in metal. There was a barely audible hum behind her. "This is the last door," she whispered. Olivia moved closer to the door and listened. The hum was steady, like a working mechanism or generator. Nate was standing a few steps behind, his face a mixture of fear and annoyance. "Are you really going to do this?" "What is it?" he asked, watching her take hold of the handle. "We came here to find out what's behind all this," she replied firmly. Olivia pulled the door open. It turned out to be heavier than expected, and there was a loud screeching sound when it was opened. There was a spacious room behind the door, but it was completely empty. The floor and walls glistened as if they had just been cleaned, and in the center stood a massive glass capsule. There was nothing inside it, just a few hanging pipes and wires. A single light bulb was blinking above the capsule. "Is that all?" Nate breathed out in disappointment as he followed her in. "No." "There's something wrong here," Olivia whispered, looking around the room. There was another screen on one of the walls. It was old, with thick glass, but suddenly turned on, giving out a sharp noise. Then the text appeared on the screen. "The test environment is activated. Opening hours. Unknown. The mode is completed. Confirm the deletion." "Confirm deletion? What?" Nate asked, moving closer to the screen. There was a button marked in red on the panel under the screen. It looked new, as if it had just been replaced. "Don't touch it," Olivia warned. "I'm not going to," Nate snapped. He turned to the capsule. There was a trace on the floor below her that looked like leaked oil or liquid. It was thick, dark, and there was a faint smell of burning coming from it. "The capsule has been used recently," he suggested. Olivia walked over to the table that stood against the wall. There was another folder on it. She opened it and began to read. "The final testing phase has failed. The object exhibits uncontrollable instability. The evacuation of personnel has been completed. The area will be closed and isolated. Any attempt to enter can lead to unpredictable consequences." "What other consequences?" she muttered. There was a small audio cassette next to the folder. On its body, someone wrote with a marker, "Diary of an Observer. The last session." "Can we listen to it?" asked Nate. There was an old tape recorder on the next table. Olivia inserted the tape and pressed play. The speaker hissed, and then a voice was heard. He was quiet but picky, belonged to a man. "This is the latest report. We can no longer control the situation. People are missing. Equipment is out of order. Every time someone tries to stop it, it disappears. I do not know why everything went like this. No one comes in here. If you're listening to this, leave. Close the door." Forget that you were here. The tape clicked and stopped. That doesn't explain anything, Nate said, still staring at the capsule. But it's a warning, Olivia replied. The text appeared on the screen again. Object deletion is activated. Please leave the area. There was a low rumble, similar to the one they had heard before, but now it became louder. The capsule began to shake. Its glass walls were covered with small cracks. We have to leave, Nate shouted, grabbing Olivia's hand. But what kind of object is this? She asked stubbornly. It doesn't matter. You heard the warning. They rushed to the exit, but the door through which they entered slammed shut with a deafening sound. No, open up. Nate was hitting her with his fists. The hum became so loud that the air around them seemed dense. The walls of the room began to shake, and small pieces of plaster fell from the ceiling. Olivia grabbed the instruction book, trying to find something that might help. There should be an emergency shutdown system here. Stop it, she screamed. What kind of system? We're trapped. The capsule in the center began to emit smoke. Her glass cracked completely, and a few seconds later there was a loud explosion. When Olivia and Nate turned to the capsule, everything happened instantly. A deafening explosion shook the air like a lightning strike, destroying everything in its path. Pieces of glass, metal, and wires flew across the room, piercing the walls, floor, and ceiling. Olivia fell to the floor, covering her head with her hands, but her body was shackled by an instant burning sensation, as if the room itself had become afire. Nate screamed, but his voice was drowned out by the noise of the explosion and the rumble echoing off the walls. The next moment, there was a cracking sound, and half of the ceiling collapsed right on top of them. Olivia felt something sharp graze her shoulder, and then darkness flooded her. She came to her senses after a few minutes, but everything around her was unclear and blurry. Trying to stand up, she felt a sharp pain in her chest and a pain in her head, as if someone had pierced through her. Blood was streaming down her face, and she could only breathe occasionally. Meanwhile, Nate was lying motionless, right next to her. His body was covered in debris, and there were no signs of life or movement in his eyes. He was dead, and Olivia knew it, despite the fact that she remained unable to get up. She could only look at his body, at his empty eyes, which seemed to be ajar in order to watch everything disappear around her. Olivia, exhausted, turned her gaze to the rest of the room. There was only smoke and ruined appliances in the center, which now looked like a pile of disordered metal remains. The room, which a few minutes ago seemed to be the object of a thorough scientific experiment, has now turned into ruins, consumed by fire and destruction. Her eyes came across the last screen, which didn't seem to be damaged. It was blinking, and the text appeared on it again. The deletion is complete. The project is completed. Fire alarm. All employees have been evacuated. It is forbidden to return. Those words on the screen were the only thing left of the place that had once been the center of an ambitious but doomed project. Olivia couldn't help but feel her body begin to lose its strength. She barely heard the sirens, felt no pain, no fear, just indifference to what was happening around her. She no longer felt anything, only a chill that gradually filled her consciousness. And then, as her eyes slowly closed, she heard something barely noticeable and indistinct, but like some kind of whispering. And this whispering echoed the phrase over and over again. You shouldn't be here.